Just to start off with, I want to do a couple brief introductions. To my right, which is your left, is Patrick Westfeldt. And Patrick has been with the studio for about 1.5 years. And Patrick really is our resident V-Ray expert and all-around SketchUp pro. And what you don't know about Patrick is that is actually Patrick. So if you're going to book a vacation in Aspen Snowmass, which is about 2 hours from here, chances are you might see Patrick on the website. So it's hard to get him in the office working with us, but when he's not skiing, he is in the office working, doing great work. My name is Jeremy Kay, and I have owned StudioJDK for 3 years, and I've been in the industry for 12 years, doing architectural concept design illustration. I've done everything from working with Willie Nelson to designing a resort for NASCAR drivers to huge shopping malls to 100-acre mixed-use communities. So it's been a wild ride. And unfortunately, as much as I want that guy to be me, that is not me. The studio really does 3 things. We do architectural concept design, we do environmental branding, and we do a lot of rendering and illustration services for other architects and developers. You guys can all hear me okay right now? Great. We live in a beautiful place. We feel very fortunate. We live in the Aspen Snowmass Valley. And we are inspired daily by the nature that surrounds us, and that is actually where our office is, at the very base of Snowmass Mountain. And when we're not piled under a ton of work, we do get the occasional powder day out on the mountain, which is great. So what I want to do is just give you a really quick brief backstory about where I come from, and that'll give you a better idea on how the studio was developed and how the architectural style that we render was developed. Is anyone familiar with this book? Show of hands. Has anyone ever read this book? Great. This book to me was the Bible. When I graduated college in 2002, I was an architecture major, and I saw this book and I was like, yes, that is exactly what I want to do. Not only do I want to design great spaces, but I want to be able to visually communicate the idea really effectively as well. So Mike Doyle, among others, in fact, Jim Leggett is actually sitting in the crowd. I can see him right here. And so Mike, along with Jim and a bunch of other people, were doing fabulous design drawings, all on trace paper, just great stuff. So I was like, I have to work with Mike Doyle. And I was really fortunate enough to get hired at Communication Arts right out of college where Mike worked. So I studied under Mike Doyle and with Mike Doyle for 5 years. And back then, the rendering process really was trace paper, a lot of bum wad, markers, colored pencils, Mayline rulers, all that stuff. And I started developing an affinity for Photoshop to do a lot of the coloring. So I started doing away with the Prismacolor and picked up Photoshop. But this is one of my very, very first attempts at doing a Mike Doyle impersonation at Communication Arts. And this is really the style of ArcViz at the time. I mean, 3D rendering really hadn't developed, and so it was a lot of hand drawing. I was also hired at ComArts to do a lot of FormZ work. And FormZ is a great program. It's around today, but moving from a hand-drawn kind of free-flowing environment to FormZ was really hard for someone like me. I got tied up in the settings, I got tied up in the layers, I got tied up in the materials, and all I wanted to do was get the ideas out. So what I did is I went on a search for a new computer program. And what I had heard was just down the street there was a small shop called SketchUp. And this was about SketchUp release 2 or 3. So I went down, I talked to the guys down there, they brought it into Communication Arts, and immediately my mind was blown because now I had a computer program that could model as fast as I could think. I no longer had to worry about layers and styles and all that other stuff. I could just sit and I could do and I could design. And oh yeah, it kind of looked like Mike Doyle's hand drawing too. You know, it was just perfect. So it blew my mind, instantly became my choice for 3D modeling. And so I went down to Denver and I got trained, and this was a long time ago, so I was in a little dingy hotel room in Denver with about 4 other people. It's actually trained by Tyson back there in the back. And he did such a good job that the next day I cranked out a drawing like this. Not really, but very quickly I was able to do just high level thinking. And BIM modeling is a big word out there right now, the BIM. Well, I have my own 3-letter acronym for it. I call it Big Idea Modeling. And that's really what I needed SketchUp for was, you know, at the time, we were just trying to get concepts out the door to clients before architecture was developed, before anything was really baked, and we just had to get visuals out to get people excited, to get funding, and for marketing. And so this really became my process, and I'll just walk you through really quickly how I started to develop drawings over top of SketchUp model. And this was really, at the time, kind of groundbreaking for hand drawing. It became known as a hybrid style. So I'd start with something very, very simple, like what you're looking at here. And then what I would do is I would hand draw, basically trace over top the SketchUp model to give it a lot of richness and warmth and a lot more detail and entourage. And then what I would do is I'd scan the line work into Photoshop, and I would overlay a color layer over top of that, as you can see here. And then what I'd start to do is I'd start to, with a Wacom tablet, I'd start to paint in the buildings in the background, just trying to get some tonality set in the drawing. Start adding a little bit more detail here, as you can see. A little bit more. And so these drawings really acted like oil paintings. And, you know, I was building these up in Photoshop, oftentimes just on one layer, because I was pretty new at Photoshop at the time. But the ease of using Photoshop as opposed to going back and having to redraw something by hand, it was really easy for me to go back into the Photoshop file and change something if the client had something they needed to change. So you can see how these buildings built up over time in Photoshop using SketchUp as the base. And there's the final, sometimes we call them the hero images. So that's the final rendering for this project. And the great thing about SketchUp at the time was we could do the big color rendering to get everyone excited, but then it now had infinite views that you could associate with the rendering. So you could have 30 accompanying views in black and white and color, whatever you want, that really illustrated to the client what the space was going to feel like and how you were going to move about the space. And this was really groundbreaking for a lot of us at the time because, as I said before, it was mainly hand drawing. Now we had a 3D modeling program that was very intuitive, very conceptual, that really fortified all our design ideas. And so that really became my rendering process for quite a long time. I did a lot of illustrations and concepts, everything from small alleyway renovations in Denver, as you see here, to huge mixed-use entertainment destinations. And it was just a completely, it was just a seamless tool for me to use. And so after a while, I realized that the work was really starting to pile up on the back end, and I needed to evolve my process a little bit. So I started developing my own process, and a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I sent my process to Ronan Beckerman. Is anyone familiar with Ronan Beckerman? So this tutorial actually appeared on his blog, and what it is I'll walk you through. It's just how I built up a SketchUp model over time using Photoshop. So I'd start with the line work. And then what I'd do is I'd export shadows only. And in this slide, what you're looking at is I've done a little bit of a hue and saturation adjustment to the shadows. Then what I would do is I'd export all the amenities as a PNG, a transparent PNG. And that's pretty important to say. You don't want to export them as a JPEG, but if they're a transparent PNG, what you can do is then copy and paste those in place in Photoshop. They'll show up exactly where you want in your image. And then you can use those not only as a quick selection mask, but it really pops the details out on over the background. And the last thing I'd do to prep these drawings was I would come back in and kind of after the fact add in line work. So you can see I've got a lot of construction lines in there. I've got a vanishing point. I've got my horizon line. It looks like I've drawn all this with a mainline ruler, and I did that to kind of loosen up the drawing and make it feel much more conceptual, and I was raised, you know, using hand-drawn tools, so it just felt kind of right to me. What I would do is I'd come in and add a color layer, a lot like what you saw on the previous build. I could come in and add a sky, and then some block in color. And then there's that amenity layer. So you can see, I'll go back one. You can see that as a transparent PNG, I can just copy and paste that right in place into the Photoshop file. It comes in exactly where I want, and it's already colored, it's already rendered. It was a nice time saver for me. Here I'm just adding storefront and awnings. And then in this slide, I'll go back one again. This slide was really important. It was the introduction of photographic textures. So if you look at the, I've got a laser pointer, I suppose I should use it. I've got the concrete textures here. I've got a lot of activity happening in the storefronts over here. little bit of brick, a little bit of wood. Those are all photographs that I've kind of filtered into the Photoshop file. Then I would start painting in some trees, background trees, and these were all done with the Photoshop brush. And I'll go over that a little bit more tomorrow when we do our workshop. Same thing with a Photoshop brush, I was able to come in and add ground cover. Later in the process, and this goes back to saying why I work in Photoshop so much, the client really wanted to show light rail, which is this piece right here, and public art. And so I didn't have to go back and hand draw anything. I just quickly inserted those into the SketchUp model, exported them as a PNG, transparent PNG, and then was able to paste them right in place into the rendering. Here's some foreground trees. These are actually all photographic trees, and then they've been filtered a little bit and set to a kind of a low opacity to see through into the buildings. And then this slide just shows how you can work with curves and layers to really bring up the values. It's a little hard to see with all the lights on, but this is kind of a little bit of a darker image here. Curves and values, let's go. Curves and values really brings up all the whites. There's that image, full screen. Some details, all painted in Photoshop, pop jet flowers. And then photographic entourage. I used to hand draw entourage as well, but using photos and then filtering them really gives you really great richness and believability in the people very, very quickly. It would take forever to sit and hand render the orange shirt and the jean shorts and all that stuff. So that was the final image on there, and that became my method for creating renderings for a long, long time. And I would create renderings like this using the same process. So there's no 3D rendering program in this image. It's all done by hand in Photoshop on top of a SketchUp base. And these were a lot of fun to do, and I got very fluent at it, but what happened was they took a long time, and the work started piling up at the back end. And especially when I got to drawings like this, where I'm doing large master plan communities and big aerials, SketchUp was a huge time saver in my, and definitely my base, but it just took forever. So I was like, I need help. And what I did is I shifted my thinking on how I was going to use SketchUp. SketchUp was no longer going to become just my end-all be-all with Photoshop. I realized that I needed to start using it as a platform and started plugging other tools into it that would help me achieve the visuals that I needed. And it was actually a pretty profound shift for me. So when approached with a drawing like this, you know, it could be really daunting. Say, I've got a lot of layers here and a lot of textures and a lot of light and color I've got to do. But what I did is I researched around a little bit, and I started with a program called Maxwell Fire. And Maxwell Fire is a plugin for SketchUp. It's still around. It's a great program. I started using it, and within a week, I was able to kind of get a good sense for textures and lighting. And so I could take it, do a Maxwell Fire base render, knowing that this was not going to be my final rendering, but it saved me like 7 of those steps that you saw in the previous slides. And then I was able to come back over top and add all that kind of warmth and entourage and other elements to really make it feel like a conceptual drawing. And that is something that I did for quite a long time. Here's another project in the Cayman Islands, and we had no architecture developed. We had no plan. And the client was like, we've got to sell our project. We need marketing, we need fundraising, we need your help to come in and really breathe life into the project. And so start with a SketchUp model and kind of concept out some rough buildings, do a Maxwell Fire, and then come in and add all the Photoshop entourage on top of that. And you can just see how loose these drawings are, but they're very effective in communicating the spirit of a place, which is really what we're going after. Photorealistic rendering is great for dialing in details, but at this stage of a project, that's not what people want to see, because then you'd start nitpicking. Really what you want to see is just all about emotion. So as I mentioned, Maxwell Fire was a great rendering program, but I started running into speed problems pretty quickly, and I didn't feel like the plugin was robust enough, and I have an insatiable appetite just to learn more. So right about this time, Patrick joined the studio, and we started looking around for other rendering plugins to use with SketchUp when we stumbled upon Chaos V-Ray, or V-Ray with Chaos Group, excuse me. And they were already an industry leader, and we felt like we'd give them a go. So this was one of our first attempts. This is a downtown renovation project in Florida. And here was our first V-Ray base render, and we were able to achieve these results very, very quickly with very limited knowledge. We had just stumbled into V-Ray. This was after about a month or two of working with it. And again, knowing that this was only the base render, we were going to do a lot over top, but it served as a fantastic foundation for a rendering like this. We were able to come back in, add all the lighting, entourage, trees, all that kind of stuff. And V-Ray in SketchUp now is our tool of choice, and we do it for all sorts of projects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the microphone over to Patrick, who's going to go into a little bit more depth about how we use the two plugins together. And it'll get a little technical, but I think you'll find that it's incredibly powerful.
Before I get started, we are a Mac-based studio. Jeremy and I first started using V-Ray for SketchUp on our MacBook Pros, and it was very successful. We did upgrade recently to some iMacs and a little trash can, which definitely helps out our render times and productivity. And anyways, I'd like to share with you some of the progress over the year and a half. We've been learning as we go, and I'll get right into it. This is one of the first projects I started using V-Ray with. It was an eco hotel in the Cayman Islands. And basically, we just wanted some enticing water and some nice lighting as a base to come over the top with in Photoshop. So after some online tutorials, we ended up with a raw render like this, and it rendered fairly quickly, and we were happy with the way it came out. And with Jeremy's adapted post-processing, we create a stack for Photoshop. We start with the color select layer, where in SketchUp we change all of the materials to a vibrant color. That way in Photoshop we can select them or mask them later on to easily manipulate them. Next, same as before, just export a line layer to overlay on top. And using V-Ray, there's many different outputs. We most commonly use just the alpha, so we can easily mask out the background and put in our own. And again, this is the raw render, and then after usually Jeremy gets through with it, this is what it looks like. Next project I'd like to share with you, this project was in Houston, Texas, and the client came to us with their model. This was a rather large model, I think around 180 megs, and expected us just to push the magic render button, have it done the next day.
It happens all the time.
It does, doesn't it? I wanted to share this model with you just to show some of the steps we use with V-Ray for SketchUp to manage these models a little bit easier. First is the obvious thing: set up your scenes and dial in your shadows and lighting. That way you can delete any excess or unwanted geometry and really focus on just the materials that you want to manipulate later on. V-Ray incorporated proxies last summer, maybe. Corey can help us out with that. And these have been extremely helpful for high poly components such as cars or trees. We use it a lot for cars. We tend to do our vegetation in another program and in post-processing, but very helpful when you're parking hundreds of cars during a day. When editing materials, we like to use the V-Ray Material Editor. It's a very powerful tool. The first thing I always do, just because I like to do it, I feel cleaner afterwards, just purge all the unused materials. Make sure you do that with the V-Ray Material Editor and not through SketchUp. But I do use SketchUp to extract materials. Often the client wants the material that he has in the model, or Jeremy has put in a material that he wants to use. And I'll save that to a local folder, and that way I can manipulate it in Photoshop or use it to create other types of maps for normal bumping or any other maps. And then after, you can reload it back into SketchUp, just loading it in, or you can load it in through the V-Ray Material Editor. You can simply just select an old material and then apply it to the selection. There's a bunch of other great material tools that you can fiddle around with, and they're very helpful and make it very fast and easy. Just a quick note on glass or any other transparent materials. Everyone probably familiar that they can really bog down render times. And a quick tip for really large models, I think the default GI transparency is around 0.5 now, and for the larger ones, 0.8 really helps out with render times. And there's a great deal of settings that can really make or break your model and really help your rendering times. The ones that I really want to point out quickly are ticking the max depth for reflections, refractions, especially for these larger models. Somewhere between 3 or 5 I usually find works best and can really cut down in render times. Also with these larger models, I sometimes like to set the default geometry to dynamic. That way it tends to render a little bit slower, but it can really chug through those high poly models. This was the raw render that came out of this. We were very happy with it. We really experimented with some reflection mapping in the road, and we thought it turned out nicely. Then again, we used Jeremy's adapted post-processing. Use the color select, the lines to overlay on top. And another trick that we always tend to do is export the SketchUp's silhouette people. We don't often use them in our final renders. We just use them to scale our entourage. Again, the raw render and what it looked like afterwards. We were really happy with this came out, and I think this was one of the first moody skies we did, right?
One of the first, yeah. Architects love moody skies, but clients never do.
Clients hate them.
We had to change that one.
Yeah. The last project I'd like to share with you, we were fortunate enough to get a local project at the base of Aspen Mountain. This building, everything else is existing except for this one. And I just wanted to share with you the quick setup process we use for the lighting in this one. And well, first a quick note about the modeling. Everyone is well aware that if you put in a little extra time with the modeling, the renders, it will definitely show through at the end. And this was one of our first snow scenes. And just a quick tip on how we did the snow in this one. We just simply copied the roof and ground planes up, gave them a thickness, and used our new favorite plugin, the Artisan plugin, to sculpt the snow. And this added a simple snow texture that we found online. Then after it's modeled, we quickly just dive right into the lighting. In the lighting for this one, we use a dome light. That way we can map an HDR image to give the general feel of the time of day and clouds. That's generally where the moody lighting comes in. Then we use sphere lights for the light poles, and spotlights for the downlighting and the sconces, and some rectangle lights that are inside the building to throw light out into the space and back into the space. Quick note about the lighting. The V-Ray lighting comes in as its own component, but we like to nest them. That way, if you're doing the same light in a bunch of places, you can easily just adjust them. Also, in the options editor, V-Ray has a great sun and sky that naturally comes in. In this case, it was kind of a hybrid dusk rendering, so we turned off reflections and refractions because we were using the HDR image for that. But we kept on the general illumination just to help light the scene. Before we start rendering, we like to test out the lighting in essentially a clay render mode. And to do that, you just simply click or tick the box that it says override materials, and you can choose any kind of color you want to override it to. If you don't want to override a certain material, because we like to keep the transparent materials and the emitting materials on when we're testing the lighting, simply just go into the material you want to still show and untick the can be overridden box. And after some tweaking, we came out with an image like this. And we were really impressed with how this came out. We almost gave this to the clients, I feel like.
Yeah, surprise, there you go.
It's pretty snowy. That's after a good storm. So then after putting the materials back in, this was our raw render. And I left the HDR image in there just to show you that we use V-Rays very quickly in our process. And we really like to get at just the general idea of the lighting and the mood. And as you can see, the HDR image is grossly out of scale, but we're doing these quickly, and I mean, eventually that whole sky will be gone after we delete it in Photoshop. And then, again, the same process: the color select, layer, some lines to overlay. An old trick from Jeremy is just export certain objects that you can use as masks in your Photoshop file. And again, the raw render. And then finally, the render after Jeremy gets through with it. And I haven't mentioned anything about the mountain. That's because I'm going to get handed back to Jeremy. That's his handiwork.
I know it can get very technical, but I think part of what Patrick was trying to tell everyone is that it's actually very simple to come up with very, very compelling base renders in V-Ray and photorealistic renders in V-Ray. So we're really happy with that tool. That's become a staple in our workflow. Thank you, Patrick, for the segue. Excellent, excellent. I'd like to talk to you about one more plugin we use with SketchUp, and this is called View, and it's by Eon Software. And we use View 11.5 in the studio. And so for Dancing Bear Aspen, and here's a very, very early concept rendering we sent. It's not even a rendering, a sketch, a digital sketch that we sent the client on this particular project. And you can tell that Aspen Mountain is really vital in this drawing. I would say that the location is even more important than the architecture. In fact, the client told us as much. I mean, the mountain just has to be in there. You have to see the proximity of the project. So the first thing we did, as anyone would do, is to find a shortcut. And you're like, where can we find a photo of Aspen Mountain that we can put in the background? And we couldn't do it. We couldn't find the right angle. And so our only other option was to build it in 3D. And that's where View really comes in handy. So what we did is we imported all the topography using the Google Earth. Using Google Earth. You can see our project is right down here. Tiny little project, massive front side Aspen Mountain here. And then we were able to import that into Eon Software's View. And View is great. It'll let you have all the adjustments you can imagine on clouds, vegetation, atmosphere, lighting. And so what I was able to do is take that topography from Google Earth and populate it with pine and aspen tree, and then change the material of the ski slopes to snow. And then using photographic reference, I was actually able to dial in every single ski run on the front side Aspen Mountain. And Patrick here has actually skied every single one of those. And then after some tweaking, we would come out with this kind of a rendering. We did some stuff in Photoshop here. We put in some ski tracks here, but all the lifts and everything and the trees were all done in View. And this was vitally important to our client. We had to show the lifestyle. And so going back to the rendering, here's the overall final, all compiled into one Photoshop document. And View is really, really powerful for us, really important for us in projects like this. We'll oftentimes get a simple plan, a concept plan like this. And this is with Place Alliance out of Orlando, Florida. We do a lot of work with them. And they came up with a concept for an eco walk, an interpretive walk kind of over here. And then there's an eco museum center here and a little bandstand. They're like, we need help. You got to visualize it. We need help making it real to show the client. So we'd come in, and the first thing we'd do is we'd do all the SketchUp modeling on top of the 2D plan. There's a little bandstand here in the museum and the walk here. And then we would pick the perspective that we wanted to use. And then using Eon Software View, we'd come in, and one of my favorite tools for this program is something called the Ecosystem Painter. And it's that little guy right there. And what it does is it gives you a paintbrush. In the program, you can specify what you want to paint. So here I've got a number of trees and wetland shrubs and grasses. And then using a paintbrush like in Photoshop, I'm able to populate where I want these trees and plants. It's incredibly powerful. And I'm also able to kind of adjust the sky and the types and shapes of clouds here. And I'm not going to bore you with all the statistics and all the details in there, but this is the raw render coming out of View. And you can see that I've got great trees, great vegetation. The architecture, we use V-Ray for all the architecture. So the architecture isn't great, but that wasn't the point of this drawing. The point of this drawing was to show really a nice summer's eve stroll on this boardwalk while there's a concert going on in the park, and there's a lot of people watching all these wetland birds, and it's really selling, again, an environment, a feeling, an emotion. And the other thing that we use View a lot for is a lot of urban planning. So this was a flood mitigation diagram that we developed in SketchUp. So we have the Google Earth underlay here. What we did is we came in and quickly masked up all the houses and the shopping malls over here and everything. And then we just sampled the paint and painted the roof so it kind of looked like it all fit in. And then using Artisan, we kind of depressed the new areas where there was going to be flood water in here. And then using View, we were able to come up with this rendering really, really quickly. And urban designers and planners in the room, take note. I mean, this is incredibly powerful because now what we have is almost photorealistic quality bird's eye photography of basically any angle that you want in the world using SketchUp and Google Earth and View. So it's a great, great program. And to me, this is really where it all starts coming together. So our thought has shifted. SketchUp is now our platform, and it's our base, and it's always going to be the bones for what we do. We're never going to leave it. But now we have all these powerful plugins that work in concert with it. So we have V-Ray, and we have View, and we have SketchUp, and we have Photoshop, and that's a great, you have a trifecta. What do you call four things? I don't even know what you call four things. But so we've got V-Ray here on the architecture. This is very, very conceptual. This is for some new mixed-use communities in upstate New York that were affected by the flooding. Then we were able to dial in all the backgrounds. This is not a photograph. This is all rendered out of View. And then in Photoshop, we were able to patch everything together into a comprehensive visual. And I'll just walk through really briefly how this starts. So Patrick would do a base V-Ray render. We do some really quick adjustments in Photoshop. We do a little bit of glow and a little bit of softening in the background. We import a lot of paper textures, too, to really help soften the renderings. It's hard to see here, but... and then here's all the View vegetation that I've been able to export as an alpha channel and overlay that in the Photoshop file. And here's a little bit of shadows, and everyone loves nice glow in the windows. We've pumped up the windows a little bit. We've added our, we call them affectionately peeps in the office. We've added our peeps here. And a little bit of fine tuning, and there's the final image for a small clubhouse in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And that's using V-Ray for the architecture, it's using View for all the plants, and Photoshop for everything else with a SketchUp skeleton. This water is done in V-Ray, so I can cycle back now if you want to see it. But the water was done in V-Ray, and Patrick can go over how he displaced the water at the end of the presentation. The other great thing about SketchUp and all the plugins that happen is we're allowed to really explore the different avenues of visual communication. This is the project I mentioned earlier in the Cayman Islands, and we were charged with coming up with 5 or 6 home designs with no plans, with no architecture in mind, very little information. They're like, okay, go. So you're like, all right, what do I do? And the trick is to make it believable and make it solid, but don't make it so believable that people can start picking apart the architecture. So architects in the room, I'm sure you could look at this and be like, you can't build that. But the idea here is that we're selling a lifestyle. What we really want is the people who are going to buy into this project in the Cayman Islands to look at these and be like, yes, I really want to live there. I want to subscribe to that lifestyle. And that's the whole purpose of drawings like this. It's not to really blow people away with these beautiful homes or anything, but it's just really to immerse them into the lifestyle of the Cayman Islands. So these drawings were done using SketchUp for all the architecture. We did a little bit of V-Ray as the base render, and then we just had fun deconstructing these to really make them feel very, very conceptual, almost dreamlike. And the point I want to make here is that it's important not to become a slave to the software. You know, if you have an idea in your head, really push it and really work with it to make it fit what you have in your head. So this is a totally non-traditional rendering, but it really worked for the client. They were ecstatic. We were able to communicate the ideas, and we weren't a slave to any one particular software. Here's another concept drawing for the Cayman Islands. This one uses a little bit more photorealistic texture here in the wood. This, to me, looks incredibly real, what Patrick did on here. Reflections in the glass, but it still feels very dreamy and conceptual. We were able to soften it in Photoshop. And a lot of times what we do, too, on the concept drawing is we'll design a space and really just focus on the tactile materials in an image. So in this instance, look, we're at the beach. We're in the Cayman Islands. We really want people to love this pool area, so the water really has to sing. You have to dial that in. This is all local stone, so that was very important, too, to get that kind of particular stone they have in the Cayman Islands in there. And then everything else, we're like, look, we can just have fun with that. And so we were able to come over top using a combination of View, Trees, and Photoshop and really make this feel very dreamlike, but very immersive. And we can do that for a lot of types of projects. This is a project actually in Bogota, and the architecture, again, was not developed. We were given a plan. It's like, okay, go. So we kind of do a really rough job, but the focus really isn't on the architecture. It's about the space and the place and the mood that you want to accomplish. So we spend a lot of time on the entourage here, all done in Photoshop, and on the lighting, a lot of which is a combination of V-Ray and Photoshop. And the other thing we do is we do a ton of environmental branding in the studio. And that translates to a lot of retail environments, restaurants, that kind of stuff. And in that case, SketchUp and V-Ray, they're just perfect for one another. So we were able to make this drawing, which is a little more photoreal, but even the worn stucco over the brick and the stenciled on letters here, that's all done with a combination of SketchUp and V-Ray. And then we were just able to do just a tiny little bit of Photoshop work just to bring everything up. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about the rise of realism in the ArcViz industry, because quite frankly, it's here to stay. And ArcViz is only going to dominate our industry, photorealism is only going to dominate our industry more and more. And I don't think it's something to be afraid of. If you're, I should even back up. So this type of work is called Npr Rendering. I don't know if a lot of you have heard that phrase, but I hate that phrase. It's because it stands for non-photorealistic rendering, and what it's saying is you guys are something that you're not. You know, you're not photoreal. And to me, it's like these images should be something that they are. They're emotive, they're conceptual, they're loose, they're engaging. It allows the viewer to connect the dots on their own in these images. So maybe when we all have a beer tonight, we can talk about a new term for the style of rendering. But what I did want to say was photorealism is definitely here to stay. It's pushing the industry boundaries, and I don't think it's something to be afraid of. I think SketchUp and V-Ray and Vue and all the other great plugins that are out there can definitely go toe-to-toe with 3D Studio Max and Cinema 4D. It's just about the artist. And so what happens is we get pushed as artists to produce better and more engaging imagery because of photorealism. So I've talked your ear off for long enough. We are leading a 3-hour work session tomorrow at 1:30 about how to create a concept drawing similar to this using just SketchUp and Photoshop. If you're interested, we'd love to have you, and I will definitely open it up to questions. Thanks. Any questions? Or is it yeah? So Vue has a bunch of different levels of product that you can buy. We have the Infinite, which is like the second from the top. I believe ecosystem population is in all of them, and I know that the, what do they call it, Pioneer maybe, is pretty affordable, and I think they have ecosystems in there too.
They also have the personal learning edition.
What's that?
They have the personal learning edition.
That is true. Yeah, they don't want you to use it for commercial work, but yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's true. So he was just mentioning that Vue does have a personal learning edition. You can download it for free and just have fun in Vue as long as you want, learn about the program for free.
How easy is it to line up your perspectives when you're working like a render from SketchUp and then bringing in that same angles from Vue with your cameras?
It's actually incredibly easy, and that's a great question. Because we work on a lot of different platforms, we'll set our cameras up in SketchUp. Patrick will start on the V-Ray using the camera that we've picked, and then using the SketchUp plugin for Vue, it'll import this exact same camera angle so I can have fun and do all my crazy plants and everything in the background, and it all comes together.
So now, Jeremy, I saw in, I think, your Cayman Islands, one of your Cayman Islands images, a bunch of palm trees that you brought in from Vue. Was that a perspective rendering that you paired with Vue, or were those rendered trees that you have saved out and photoshopped where you need them?
I think I know exactly what image you're talking about. That one?
Yeah.
So those trees, so what I did is we modeled everything in SketchUp, and then Patrick worked on the V-Ray, which consisted of that drawing right there. That's the V-Ray. And then I was able to export the same view into Vue. I hate saying Vue twice, but I have to. And then I was able to populate it with individual palm trees here. These are all sea grapes, which are really prevalent in the area. So I wanted to show those. And I was able to kind of put those where I wanted to in the scene. And then I just exported the plants using an alpha channel, brought them all into Photoshop. Does that make sense? And then layered it all in Photoshop.
I was just curious to see whether you were, because I really like the perspective and everything. I was just curious to find out, because I know some folks can actually just render the trees and stamp them in Photoshop occasionally when they need them, and I was just curious if this was actually a perspective or if there's that it's really hard to tell because it's so well integrated though. So
yeah, this one's definitely the perspective from view, but on the earlier rendering builds, especially for like Ronan and stuff like that, I would just take photographic trees that you can find, like transparent PNGs you can find all over the internet, lay them into the Photoshop file, and then kind of fake perspective where I needed to. Mm-hmm.
How many in a Photoshop like this? How many layers are you working?
He wouldn't know because he doesn't keep track.
That's an excellent answer. I don't know. I don't keep track, and that's a terrible answer. But we have our deadlines are so crazy that I don't layer anything in Photoshop, or I don't name them, and so when Patrick maybe has to go back in or change something, it just he has a conniption. But something like this, we've got. Let me try to break it down really quickly. We've got one layer for the view trees. We've got the V-Ray base. We've got the SketchUp line work. We've got entourage, and every person is on their own layer. And then we have a myriad of, the clouds I painted in. This stuff is photographic here. There's actually some paint blobs back here just to indicate shrubbery. So maybe 100, all in. And I get really lazy, so maybe one layer is like a line way off in, no man's land, and it shouldn't even be there. So, where am I looking? Yeah. That's a great question. So before, when I was showing you Ronan's process, and even before that, we're looking at 3 to 5 days. I mean, it took a long time. Now I'm down to, and I hate to say this because if any of my clients are listening, but within 2 days we can turn it. It depends how updated the SketchUp model is. If we have to build the whole model from scratch, just from elevations and plans, that adds a lot of time. But if we're given a fairly complete drawing, 2 days. We have other stuff going on in the office at the same time.
We do similar things in our office, and we like the style, we like the hand-drawn, non-photorealistic, but we've been asked recently to do animations.
Sure.
And we're working on trying to develop that system, but I don't know if you guys have been asked to animate this style.
We have, and I've actually had to turn down a fair amount of work because we currently don't do animation. It's something we want to do, and we have someone in Boulder we've been talking to who's really interested in working with us in developing just this style, but making it all of a sudden come to life and rotate around. And they do it in video games, right? It can be done in high-level, animated films. So it can definitely be done. When I think about how much work that would take on like our part, but it's something we're really interested in. Yeah, good question. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's important you can't become a slave of the software. That's a point I really want to drive home. I mean, a lot of the bad photorealistic and 3D rendering stuff out there is because they know how to put a couple textures in there and they push the render button and they're like, here, look, I'm a 3D artist. And that kind of strikes a nerve with me because I'm like, well, the real 3D artists really put a lot of emotion in it. They don't want to become a slave to any one style. And so, yeah.
I'd be interested to hear your comments on client management. Do you give them 1, 2, 3 cycles of input?
It's an excellent question. I would prefer to just say here. Here's the drawing, but yeah, usually what we'll do is we'll give them the SketchUp view, black and white line work. And we'll be like, here's the view we're thinking for you. And it won't have any trees or people, it'll just be the architecture or whatever else we're doing. And then we'll send them the first pass. And we'll be like, here's the rendering, and feel free to comment. They can send back comments, we'll make revisions. But after that, it gets kind of, those are choppy waters to navigate. Yeah.
So Jeremy, is your first pass looking like this, or is your first pass?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll build from here to here, all in the studio as our first pass, and then send it to them. And if they're like, well, take out this girl with the red shirt, and we get entourage comments all the time about entourage is so freaking important. But or they're like, we want the umbrellas to be red, or we need a couple more of these chairs, and we'll do that. That's no problem. Yeah. Yep.
In
It is.
So those trees are 3D.
They are.
So farther away is the same tree. You need a perspective or like turn it around and stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, so
Inside a 2D image, you're going to compass it with 3D.
that's right. The great thing about view is no two plants are the same. So if you were like, I want a palm, I think these might be date palms, and I don't know if those are correct for the Cayman Islands actually, but and I'll specify a palm and I'll put it right there. The great thing about view is I'll say, okay, I want another one, and it'll generate one in 3D for me, different palm. No two branches will be the same. The trunk's going to be different. It's great. It's really amazing. And then what happens is I'm able to kind of clone those with, this is a paintbrush that I have. And so that's not even view. That's just painted in the background to really give it a sense of like mist and depth. But even the sea grapes here, those are every sea grape is different. So, and then you can rotate them, you can scale them, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
On top of a 2D.
Not on top of a 2D. So I need to do it in the program. Excellent question.
Because your process is a 2D image, and then you have those 3D plants on it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you integrate that?
It's an excellent question. I'll go back if I can. Oh, I'm getting the fan. Uh-oh. Laptop's getting hot. Excellent question. So let me go back to the screen because I think this will really help you and it might answer some questions other people have. So this screen right here, this is the view interface here. So you can see that I've got the SketchUp architecture imported, and these are all 3D trees now, right? And so once I've picked my view, which is actually showing up right here, I'll just export that as a 2D TIFF or JPEG or whatever, and then layer it, and then in Photoshop we can mask out where we want V-Ray or where we want SketchUp or whatever. So we do quite a bit of work in Photoshop.
So you said it had sea grapes and some palms that were appropriate for the Cayman Islands. How robust of plant palette does you have per area?
It's pretty robust. Like any software, there's good and bad out there, right? It kind of has like an extension warehouse, kind of like SketchUp. A lot of it is you have to pay for the plant species. You just have to be selective because some of the stuff you get, you're like, oh, I just paid for that, and some of it's fantastic. You know, does that answer your question? Yeah.
Sort of similar, related question. Have you guys, because I'm looking at it as well, have you guys messed with their newest plant-based modeling, the Plant Factory?
I have a copy of the Plant Factory. I have not had time to dive into it.
It seems like something that takes
Yeah.
time. Okay, I was just
So once you populate the trees, how long does that take to render?
In View or in V-Ray or in View? So we affectionately call it the trash can, which we've now called Black Beauty, but it's the Mac Pro. So we have the new Mac Pro, and we're running two 2013 iMacs that are kind of souped up. So they actually render pretty quick. Kind of like V-Ray, you really have to fine-tune the settings in View to kind of balance quality versus render speed. So if we kind of combine the two, something like this could render in a couple hours, like 2 hours. Yeah. So, any other? Yeah.
Could you show, in one of the slides you mentioned, after you do the V-Ray, you had a contrast line that you kind of worked with in Photoshop. Just the kind of orange and blue and green, really dark colors and shades. How do you use them on the computer?
Actually, how do you create them?
The color select.
Oh, the color select layer. Okay. Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, so this is something that we do out of SketchUp, and what we'll do is we'll take all the textures and color them really vibrant, almost neon colors. And the reason we do that is we'll then bring it into Photoshop, and then that just gives us ultimate flexibility in different areas of the architecture. So you can see here that all the windows are purple. And so that way in Photoshop, I can magic wand one of the purple areas, select similar, and suddenly have just the windows selected for me. And I can adjust the color, I can fake in a reflection, I can do any of that. And same with, this is all stone, all the green was the roofing, blue was brick paver, black was the street. And so what that does is when we bring it into, I'm not in the full screen mode here. We don't use the colors just for selecting, and it sits at the very, very bottom of our Photoshop stack. It's called a stack. And then that way, so if you look at Patrick's great V-Ray render here, and where it got to here, let's go back. You know, there's no reflections in here because we didn't have anything built on the other side of the street, but we needed to fake all that in. So using that purple color select layer, I could select all the windows, fake in some of the old oak trees that were across the street, and do some more. It just gives you a lot of control.
Just to sort of piggyback on that, V-Ray in the latest service release now, if you select in the channels where you can choose your different channel layers, you can now select Material ID, and it automatically populates that and exports that layer out with your render.
That's right. That's an excellent
So
point.
that
Yeah,
way
it's
you don't
now.
have to add one more extra thing to export out of SketchUp.
Yeah.
It just comes with it.
It is fully integrated into V-Ray now, which is a great feature. Yeah.
Another question: how do you get your view images to match up with what's coming out of SketchUp?
So there's a plugin, a SketchUp to View plugin, and when you export it, it'll export the camera, the exact camera that you have in SketchUp. So that allows us to work in V-Ray and in View simultaneously, and then bring it all back in Photoshop, and it'll match up. Yeah. Yes, sir.
As far as what versions of View do you guys use? You said you had Infinite in the office, and then the SketchUp one as well. I ask because their website, there's like View, Studio, Infinite, blah, 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 blah. There's an architectural package, there's a graphic package, but it's really tough to tell which ones work with what and what you will need.
That's a great point. I would be careful and find out what's important to you in View and what you want it for. If you want it for full render, you just want to render out of the box and use that rendering, I think you can go with any program that they have. We chose Infinite because you could export alpha channels and a myriad of alpha channels, every kind of alpha channel, and do animation. So that's why we ended up with Infinite.
I'll have to talk to them, because I do renders in like Max, Maya, and SketchUp, and it's tough to find one that balances all three.
Totally.
It doesn't seem to be one. So.
5 more minutes? Okay.
Where did you pick up your talent for adding the emotion to images?
Well, thank you for saying talent and make me blush up here. But where did I pick up my talent? Well, yeah, I mean, I graduated from University of Colorado with an architecture degree. Realized that when I was in structures class, that stuff was just going right over my head. But when I was in studio, I was like really into it and doing really well. So I realized that I was more about the design and the communication of the idea than I was about building the projects. And working with Mike Doyle helped an awful lot. He really taught me a lot about composition and value and foreground, middle ground, background, and all that kind of stuff. And then I just read a ton. I mean, this guy Jim sitting behind you is one of the masters of hand drawing, and so there's guys that there's a lot of guys that you can read, and you just kind of pour over books, and then it's practice. You really gotta practice. I've been doing this for 12 years, and some of my earlier stuff I didn't even want to show you guys. It was pretty bad, but so.
How much of your practice is actual visualization, and how much of it is actual projects?
Great question. Yeah, about 50-50.
So with your practice that you're doing, is this part of that you sell to a client, or is this whole separate, we can take your buildings and we can do this to it? And, from like a firm that we work at, it's something that we're either hiring this from somebody else or we're doing it in-house, and always one of those things, it's hard for us to get an idea of how much that costs. Yeah.
So when we do renderings, for example, this is not our project. This is for an architect. Large architecture firm, and we're just totally, we love image making. We love telling stories, so we'll get the SketchUp model from them. We'll just do the rendering, and we do a ton of it. And but the other part of it is we'll get a plan, if you can even call it that, and they're like, we need help marketing the project, or we need to go to investors, or we need city approval, and we just need help concepting everything. It doesn't even have to be real. Just give us a couple of images and really tell the story, and we love doing that too. Is that relatively? And then, in terms of fee, I mean, it depends who's asking, like how much we charge per drawing, but we'll either charge on a package rate or a per image rate, and then it's just about how much of the SketchUp model is complete, because we build everything off of SketchUp, and so if we need to go in and remodel everything, the fees go higher. Yeah. Then we just start pulling our hair out, and we get some pretty crazy models sometimes. And yeah.
So are the models always in SketchUp, or do you get models?
Well, so we sometimes we'll get models in ArchiCAD or Revit. I would really love to talk to some people about how to get those to work more nicely with SketchUp. Because we end up, that's when we start wasting a lot of time trying to get the geometry from Revit or ArchiCAD to work within SketchUp. And oftentimes we kind of just give up, and then we can mask it all in Photoshop, which is fine. But sometimes if you're a purist, you really want your model to be perfect before you render. And we just don't have the time to do that a lot of the time. Yeah. Anything else? Well, thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.